What happens when one of the most charismatic stars in Hollywood walks onto a daytime talk show known for sharp opinions, and the conversation suddenly turns into a moment no one in the studio, or watching at home, will ever forget. The cameras are already rolling. The lights glow across the famous table. The audience settles into their seats with the quiet excitement that always fills the studio before a big guest appears. On the set of The View, the hosts shuffle their cue cards and exchange glances that seem casual on the surface. But something in the air feels slightly different today. Because today's guest isn't just another actor promoting a movie. Today's guest is Dwayne Johnson, a global superstar, former wrestling champion, box office powerhouse, a man whose presence alone can electrify a room before he even says a word. And today, that presence is about to collide with one of the show's most outspoken voices, Joy Behar. But before we dive into the moment that stunned the entire studio, make sure you hit that subscribe button for Stage View, drop a like, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Because the story you're about to hear is one of those television moments people will talk about for years. It begins quietly, almost too quietly. Backstage, Dwayne Johnson stands near the curtain, towering over the production assistants moving around him. He's dressed sharp but relaxed, dark suit, open collar, that unmistakable calm confidence that has made him one of the most recognizable faces in the world. He's done hundreds of interviews before. Thousands, if you count his wrestling days. But even someone like him knows that The View is unpredictable. Through the curtain, he can hear the muffled voices of the hosts already talking to the audience. Laughter ripples across the studio. A producer leans toward him. 30 seconds, Dwayne. He nods once, calm and collected. But just before he steps forward, a conversation drifting from the table catches his attention. Joy Behar's voice. Sharp, animated, and unmistakably skeptical. "I'm just saying," she says to the audience, waving one hand in the air. "Sometimes celebrities think they can solve everything just by being nice and inspirational on Instagram." The crowd chuckles politely. Another host leans forward. "Are you talking about someone specific?" Joy shrugs dramatically. "Oh, you know who I'm talking about." There's a ripple of knowing laughter. Behind the curtain, Dwayne hears it. His expression doesn't change, but his eyes narrow just slightly. He's heard criticism before. It comes with fame. Comes with the territory of being one of the most visible people on the planet. But there's something about the tone. The way it hangs in the air. The producer signals again. 10 seconds. The music begins. The studio lights brighten. And suddenly the announcer's voice booms through the room. "Please welcome actor, producer, and global superstar, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson." The curtain parts. And the audience explodes. Cheers erupt across the studio like a wave crashing against the walls. People jump to their feet, clapping, shouting, some even chanting the nickname that followed him from the wrestling ring to Hollywood. "Rock! Rock! Rock!" Dwayne steps onto the stage with that familiar grin. The one that has sold billions at the box office and filled arenas around the world. He waves to the audience, shaking a few hands as he approaches the table. The hosts stand to greet him. Handshakes. Hugs. Joy Behar smiles politely as she greets him. But there's something measured about it. Something careful. "Nice to see you," she says. "Always good to be here," Dwayne replies warmly. They all sit down. For a moment, everything feels like a normal talk show interview. Another host begins with the usual questions. "So, Dwayne, your new movie is already breaking presale records. Did you expect this kind of reaction?" Dwayne chuckles. "You never expect anything in this business," he says. "You just hope people show up and enjoy the ride." The audience laughs. The conversation flows easily at first. They talk about filming stunts, long days on set, his family, his famous cheap meals. Classic talk show territory. The crowd relaxes. Even Joy smiles along as he tells a story about nearly setting off a fire alarm in his trailer while cooking pancakes at 3 a.m. But then, the tone shifts. Joy leans forward slightly, resting her chin on her hand. And the room grows just a little quieter. "Dwayne," she says slowly, "you've built this image over the years, the motivational guy. The positivity guy. The hard work fixes everything guy." Dwayne nods politely. "I try to spread good energy," he says. Joy tilts her head. "But some people think that message is a little unrealistic." A murmur runs through the audience. The other hosts glance at each other. Dwayne's smile softens, but he stays calm. "Unrealistic how?" he asks. Joy lifts her hands. "Well, Not everyone can wake up at 4 in the morning, work out for 3 hours, run multiple businesses, and still smile about it on social media. Scattered laughter. But there's an edge to it. Dwayne nods thoughtfully. I get that, he says. Everyone's path is different. Joy raises an eyebrow. But don't you think it creates pressure? She continues. This idea that if someone isn't successful, it's because they didn't work hard enough. The audience shifts in their seats. The question hangs in the air. For the first time since he sat down, Dwayne pauses longer than usual. He folds his hands on the table. And when he speaks again, his voice is calm, but firmer. I've never said success is easy, he says. Joy smiles thinly. But that's the message people hear. The studio grows noticeably quieter. The other hosts try to steer the conversation back toward lighter territory. But Joy isn't finished. And let's be honest, she adds. It's easier to talk about hard work when you're one of the highest-paid actors in Hollywood. A few gasps ripple through the crowd. One host looks down at her notes. Another shifts uncomfortably. But Joy keeps going. I mean, not everyone gets the kind of opportunities you've had. For a brief moment, the room feels frozen. The cameras stay locked on Dwayne's face. And something changes in his expression. The friendly grin fades slightly. Not anger, not frustration, but a quiet seriousness that commands attention. He leans back in his chair, takes a slow breath, and when he finally speaks again, the tone of the entire interview begins to change. Joy, he says calmly, can I tell you something about opportunities? The audience goes silent. Joy crosses her arms lightly. Of course. Dwayne nods once. Because I think people might be misunderstanding something. The room leans in. Cameras zoom closer. And the moment that will soon dominate headlines is only just beginning. The studio falls into a quiet that feels heavier than the bright lights above the stage. Dwayne Johnson sits calmly at the table, his hands loosely folded, his posture relaxed, but there's a shift in the atmosphere that everyone can feel. The audience senses it first. That subtle change when a conversation moves from friendly talk show banter into something deeper. Joy Behar watches him closely, waiting. The other hosts glance back and forth between them, and the cameras stay locked on Dwayne. He exhales slowly. Joy, he says again, his voice calm but deliberate. Can I tell you something about opportunities? Joy gestures with her hand. Please. Dwayne nods. Opportunities matter, he begins. But people sometimes assume they just appear. The audience listens intently. He leans forward slightly. I didn't grow up with opportunities, he continues. In fact, most of the time growing up, we were just trying to figure out where we were going to live next. A quiet murmur moves through the audience. Joy tilts her head. You've talked about that before, she says. But not everyone who struggles ends up a global superstar. Dwayne nods. You're right, he says simply. The response catches Joy slightly off guard. She expected pushback. Instead, Dwayne continues. You're absolutely right. Not everyone who struggles becomes successful. Life doesn't guarantee fairness. The audience remains silent, hanging on every word. But here's the part people don't always hear when they talk about my story, he adds. His voice lowers slightly. When I was 14 years old, we got evicted. Several people in the audience gasp quietly. The hosts exchange glances. Dwayne's tone stays steady, but there's a weight behind it now. We came home one day and the locks were changed, he says. All our stuff was sitting outside. The studio becomes completely still. Joy's arms slowly uncross. I watched my mom cry on the sidewalk, Dwayne continues. The words land heavily. And in that moment, I made a promise to myself that I would do everything in my power to make sure that never happened again. The audience is silent. One of the hosts softly says, Wow. Dwayne shrugs lightly. That promise became the reason I wake up early. The reason I work hard. The reason I talk about discipline. Joy taps her pen against the table. But that's exactly my point, she says carefully. Your story is inspiring, sure. But it can also make people feel like if they're not achieving that level of success, they've somehow failed. A few audience members nod. Dwayne listens without interrupting. Then he smiles slightly. Joy, I think there's a misunderstanding about what success actually means. Joy raises an eyebrow. Oh, Dwayne turns slightly toward the audience. To me, success isn't about becoming the biggest movie star in the world. He pauses. It's about progress. The audience listens. For some people, he continues, success means building a billion-dollar company. He raises one finger. For someone else, it means paying their rent on time. Another finger. For someone else, it means getting through a difficult week. The room grows thoughtful. But when I talk about discipline or positivity, he says, I'm not telling people they have to become me. Joy leans forward. Then what are you telling them? Dwayne looks directly at her. I'm telling them not to give up on themselves. The audience applauds softly. Joy waits for the clapping to settle. Then she speaks again. But critics would say that message ignores structural problems, poverty, inequality, systems that keep people from advancing no matter how hard they try. The air tightens again. It's a sharper question now, the kind that could easily turn the conversation tense. One of the hosts begins to shift, clearly ready to jump in and redirect. But Dwayne lifts a hand slightly. No, that's a fair point, he says. Joy nods, surprised again by the calm response. Dwayne continues. Those problems exist. Absolutely. I've seen them. I've lived them. He pauses. But here's the difference. The audience leans forward. I don't believe acknowledging those problems means we stop encouraging people to push forward. Joy's lips press together. You make it sound simple. It's not simple, Dwayne replies immediately. He gestures lightly with his hands. Nothing about life is simple. The conversation now feels more like a debate than an interview. The audience senses it too. And yet, Dwayne's tone never becomes hostile. He remains composed. Measured. Joy studies him for a moment. Then she delivers the comment that shifts the entire room. But you also benefit from a very carefully crafted image, she says. The audience murmurs. Dwayne tilts his head slightly. What do you mean? Joy smiles faintly. The motivational speeches. The inspirational posts. The idea that you're the hardest working guy in the room. A few scattered laughs from the crowd. Joy shrugs. Some people think it's branding. There's a sharp ripple through the audience. One host whispers, oh boy. But Dwayne doesn't react the way people expect. Instead, he chuckles. Actually chuckles. And the unexpected reaction throws everyone off balance. Joy frowns slightly. You think that's funny? Dwayne nods. Yeah, he says. Why? He leans back in his chair. Because if someone thinks waking up at 4 a.m. for the last 20 years is just branding, they're welcome to try it. The audience erupts into laughter and applause. Joy shakes her head with a half smile. Well played. But the moment isn't over. Because Dwayne leans forward again. And this time his voice carries a quiet intensity. Joy, I don't pretend to be perfect. The applause fades. I've failed more times than most people will ever know. He glances toward the audience. My football career ended before it really began. Another pause. My first movie roles were criticized. And there were times in my life when I didn't know what the future looked like. Joy watches him carefully. But you know what kept me going? He asks. No one answers. Dwayne points gently toward the audience. People. The room listens. People who believed in me when I wasn't sure I believed in myself. The sincerity in his voice changes the mood again. Even Joy's expression softens slightly. But she's not ready to let the conversation end there. So you're saying the critics are wrong? She asks. Dwayne smiles again. No, he says. The answer surprises everyone. I'm saying they're allowed to have their opinion. He shrugs lightly. That's part of living in a free society. Joy nods slowly. But I will say this. The studio becomes quiet once more. Dwayne's voice grows firmer. If someone out there hears my story, and it helps them get through one difficult day, then every early morning, every speech, every message was worth it. The audience bursts into applause again. But Joy isn't clapping. She's watching him, studying him. And then she says something that makes the temperature in the room drop again. Let me ask you something directly. Dwayne nods. Sure. Joy leans forward. Do you think celebrities like you sometimes silence criticism just by being likable? A few audience members gasp. The other hosts glance nervously toward the producers off stage. This question feels different. Sharper. More personal. And for the first time in the interview, Dwayne Johnson's expression becomes completely serious. He looks at Joy for several seconds before answering. The room holds its breath. And when he finally speaks, the words that follow will send the entire studio into stunned silence. Because the moment Dwayne Johnson decides to truly respond, the conversation is about to explode in a way no one on that stage expected. For several seconds, the studio is so quiet that the hum of the lights above the stage almost feels audible. The audience sits frozen. The hosts wait. Joy Behar leans forward slightly, her eyes fixed on Dwayne Johnson, clearly expecting a careful, diplomatic answer. After all, celebrities usually sidestep questions like this. They smile, deflect, pivot to promotion. But something about this moment feels different. Dwayne doesn't rush his response. He studies Joy for a moment, then glances briefly at the audience surrounding them. When he finally speaks, his voice is calm, but there's a weight behind it now. Joy, he says slowly, I've spent most of my life being criticized. A small ripple moves through the crowd. He continues, when I first stepped into professional wrestling, critics said I was a gimmick. A few audience members nod knowingly. They said I smiled too much, talked too much, that I wasn't a real wrestler. He chuckles quietly. And then when I left wrestling to pursue acting, the same critics said I'd never make it in Hollywood. The room listens carefully. They told me I was too big, too different, too much of a risk. He pauses. But here's the thing about criticism, he continues. It can either crush you or sharpen you. Joy watches him closely. So no, he says firmly. Being likable doesn't silence criticism. He gestures toward himself with a slight shrug. If that were true, none of those headlines would have existed. The audience laughs softly. Joy nods. That's fair. But Dwayne isn't finished. And I don't want criticism to disappear, he adds. That statement surprises her. Joy raises an eyebrow. You don't? No. Dwayne leans forward slightly. Criticism can be healthy. It forces people to grow. The audience murmurs in agreement. But there's a difference, he continues, between criticism and dismissal. Joy tilts her head. What do you mean by that? Dwayne pauses. His gaze shifts briefly toward the audience before returning to the table. Sometimes people look at someone's success, he says carefully, and instead of asking how they got there, they assume it must not be genuine. The room grows thoughtful. Joy taps her pen against the table again. So you think people dismiss your work? Dwayne smiles faintly. Sometimes. Joy shrugs. Well, you are everywhere. The audience chuckles. Movies, businesses, television appearances, social media. You've built an empire, she says. And when someone becomes that successful, people naturally question it. Dwayne nods. That's human nature. Joy leans forward again. But let me ask you something else. The tension slowly creeps back into the room. Do you ever worry, she asks, that the motivational image you've built makes people feel like you're preaching at them? A few audience members whisper to each other. The other hosts glance between them again. It's the kind of question that could easily derail the tone of the conversation. But Dwayne doesn't look offended. Instead, he smiles, though this time it's a thoughtful smile. Actually, he says, I think that's a really important question. Joy seems mildly surprised. He continues, because motivation can come across the wrong way if people think you're standing above them. The audience nods. But that's never been my intention. Joy gestures with her hand. Then what is your intention? Dwayne takes a breath. My intention, he says, is to stand beside people, not above them. The audience applauds. Joy watches the reaction carefully. Then she leans back in her chair. You know, she says with a small smile, you're very good at this. The crowd laughs. Dwayne chuckles. At what? Answering tough questions. More laughter. But I'm serious, Joy continues. You're very controlled. Very polished. The word polished hangs in the air. And some people might say that's part of the brand too. There it is again. The suggestion. The idea that the version of Dwayne Johnson the world sees might be carefully constructed. A murmur runs through the audience. One of the hosts shifts nervously. But this time, Dwayne's response comes quicker. Joy, he says calmly, can I ask you something? Joy nods. Sure. Dwayne gestures toward the audience. How many people do you think are watching this show right now? Joy shrugs. Millions, probably. And how many different opinions do you think exist among those millions of people? She smiles slightly. A lot. Exactly. Dwayne nods. So some people might think I'm fake. The audience murmurs. Some might think I'm genuine. He shrugs. And some might not think about me at all. The crowd laughs. But here's the truth, he continues. The person you see sitting here is the same person my daughters see when I come home. The tone shifts again. Now the audience listens with complete focus. The same person my friends see. The same person my family sees. Joy studies him. And you're saying that's completely authentic? She asks. Dwayne meets her gaze. Yes. The answer is simple. Direct. And for a moment, neither of them speaks. Then Joy sighs lightly. Well, I'll give you credit. The room relaxes slightly. You're holding your ground. Dwayne smiles. I'm just having a conversation. The audience applauds again. But the conversation isn't finished yet, because Joy glances down at her notes, then looks back up. And what she says next causes a ripple of shock across the entire studio. You know, she begins slowly, there are critics who say Hollywood loves you because you're safe. The other hosts instantly react. One whispers, Joy. Another shakes her head slightly. But Joy continues. They say you don't challenge the system, that you play it. The audience murmurs loudly now. A few gasps break through the crowd. Even the producers off stage seem to shift uncomfortably. Because this question goes beyond motivational speeches or social media. This touches on something bigger. And for the first time since the interview began, Dwayne Johnson's smile disappears completely. He sits back in his chair. The muscles in his jaw tighten slightly. The studio becomes eerily quiet. Joy waits. The audience waits. And when Dwayne finally speaks, his voice carries a calm authority that immediately commands the room. Joy, he says slowly, I've spent my entire career challenging expectations. The tension in the studio thickens. And if you think playing by the rules is how I got here. He pauses, then shakes his head. You might want to look a little closer. The audience erupts into applause. But the moment isn't over. Because Dwayne leans forward again, his eyes steady, his tone unwavering. And the words he says next will completely flip the conversation, leaving the hosts, the audience, and eventually the entire internet stunned. Because now, he's not just responding. He's shutting the entire narrative down. The applause rolls through the studio like thunder, echoing off the bright walls and stage lights. For a moment, it feels as if the entire room has shifted. What started as a routine interview has turned into something far more intense, something no one in the audience expected when they walked into the studio that morning. Dwayne Johnson sits calmly at the table, hands resting together, while the sound of clapping slowly fades. Across from him, Joy Behar watches carefully. The other hosts exchange quiet looks, aware that the conversation has moved into territory that daytime television rarely reaches. The cameras stay close on Dwayne, because everyone in the room senses it. He isn't finished. He leans forward slightly, his voice steady, but carrying a deeper conviction now. He says, You mentioned critics who say Hollywood likes me because I'm safe. Joy nods once. That's what some people say. Dwayne tilts his head thoughtfully. Well, let's talk about that for a second. The audience quiets again. Because the idea that someone gets where they are by playing it safe, he continues, doesn't really line up with the path I took. He gestures lightly with one hand. When I left wrestling to go into acting, people told me I was making a huge mistake. A few audience members murmur in recognition. They said a wrestler couldn't become a serious actor. He smiles slightly. They said audiences wouldn't accept it. Joy listens carefully. So I had a choice, he continues. I could stay where I was comfortable, or I could risk failing in front of the entire world. The room grows thoughtful. And I chose the risk. The audience applauds again. Joy taps her pen lightly on the table. But that risk paid off, she says. Dwayne nods. It did. He pauses. But it didn't happen overnight. He glances briefly at the crowd. There were years where I was trying to prove people wrong. The audience listens quietly. Years where every role mattered, because I knew one bad step could send me right back to where I started. Joy leans forward again. So you're saying you challenged the system? Dwayne smiles. I'm saying I challenged expectations. The audience claps again. Then he adds something that makes the room grow quiet once more. But I'll tell you something else. Joy raises an eyebrow. What's that? Dwayne's tone softens slightly. The real reason I talk about discipline, positivity, and work ethic isn't because I think everyone should follow the same path I did. He pauses. It's because I know what it feels like to think you don't have a path at all. The words hang in the air. Several people in the audience nod. Joy watches him for a moment before speaking again. You know, she says slowly, I didn't expect this conversation to go this way. The audience laughs softly. Dwayne chuckles. Neither did I. Even Joy smiles. But there's still one last question in her eyes. So let me ask you this, she says. If someone out there thinks your message is unrealistic, what would you say to them? The room becomes quiet again. Dwayne takes a breath. And when he speaks, his voice carries a calm sincerity that fills the studio. I'd say that's okay. Joy looks surprised. He continues. Not every message resonates with every person. The audience listens closely. But if someone hears my story and it doesn't help them, that doesn't mean their journey is less important. He gestures gently toward the audience. Everyone has their own battles. A pause. The only thing I hope people take away from my story is that setbacks don't have to define you. A wave of applause sweeps through the studio again. Joy nods slowly. Well, she says with a half smile, I'll admit something. The audience quiets. What's that? Dwayne asks. Joy leans back in her chair. You handled that better than I expected. The crowd bursts into laughter. Dwayne laughs too. I'll take that as a compliment. The other hosts finally jump in, relieved. One of them says, I think this might be the most intense interview we've had all year. The audience claps again. But as the segment begins wrapping up, something unexpected happens. A member of the audience stands up. Then another. And suddenly, a wave of people rise to their feet. A standing ovation spreads across the studio. The applause grows louder and louder. Dwayne looks around the room, clearly humbled. Joy glances at the audience, then back at him. Well, she says, smiling, you definitely won them over. Dwayne shakes his head gently. It's not about winning, he says. It's about understanding each other. The applause continues. The producers signal that the segment is ending. The hosts thank him for coming. But even as the cameras pull back and the show heads toward commercial break, the energy in the studio remains electric. Because everyone knows they just witnessed something rare. A moment where tension turned into honesty. Where criticism turned into conversation. And within minutes, that moment begins spreading far beyond the studio walls. Clips from the interview explode across social media. Headlines begin appearing online. Dwayne Johnson fires back at Joy Behar. The Rock shuts down critics on live TV. Unexpected clash on The View goes viral. Millions of people watch the exchange. Some praise Dwayne's calm confidence. Others debate Joy's tough questions. Comment sections fill with opinions. Supporters, critics, conversations everywhere. But one thing becomes clear very quickly. The interview struck a nerve. Because it wasn't just about celebrities. It was about success, struggle, perception, and the complicated way the world judges both. Later that evening, Dwayne posts a short message online. Just one sentence. Respect the conversation. The message spreads almost as quickly as the interview itself. By the next morning, millions more people have watched the moment unfold. And for many viewers, one part stands out above everything else. The calm way Dwayne Johnson handled the pressure. The way he refused to turn the conversation into a fight. And the moment he quietly shut down the narrative that his story was just a brand. Because sometimes the strongest response isn't anger. Sometimes it's composure. And sometimes it's simply standing your ground. Now we want to hear from you. What did you think about this intense moment between Dwayne Johnson and Joy Behar? Did he handle the criticism the right way? Or do you think the tough questions were justified? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoy dramatic celebrity stories like this, moments that reveal what really happens behind the cameras, make sure you subscribe to Stage View, hit that like button, and stay tuned for more explosive stories from the world of entertainment. Because sometimes the most unforgettable moments happen when the cameras are already rolling.